Hi, I'm Adam. Welcome back to Godot Game Lab. In this video, we'll finally breathe some life into our shop. So if you take a look at this, we no longer have the same units available here. And if I click on Robin and Björn, it will be connected to the UnitSpawner and these units will be added to my bench. We can still sell them, we can drag them around, we can swap them with other units, so everything is set up to work with the other systems that are already inside the game. When we press reroll, 5 new units will be offered to us, taken from the unit pool, and if we buy more XP to reach higher levels, we'll have a higher chance to find units with higher rarities. So if we roll a couple of times, it might happen that we roll for a rare Arthur unit, and if we click on it, that unit will be added to our bench. You see that we have some blank spaces here, and this is not a bug, it's a feature, I promise. So the reason why is because we have multiple rarities. We have common, like Björn and Robin. We have uncommon, but we actually don't have units that have uncommon rarity attached to them. That's why we have these blank spaces. So these should be uncommon units. But since we only have 3 different kind of units, we don't see anything here. This is just to demonstrate that the game doesn't crash. It still works when we cannot have uncommon units from the pool. And we have one rare unit, which is Arthur. So let's see how we can actually implement all these. So the core part of this episode is to create the unit pooling and use that to generate the available units inside the shop. Let's look at this from a data perspective first. The first thing we gotta change is the UnitStats resource. We'll add a new property called pool count, which we'll come back to in a second. Then we'll introduce a new resource called UnitPool. In terms of data, this will be pretty simple. We'll have a member variable called UnitPool, and this will be an array of UnitStats resources. However, we'll also have 3 methods, one to generate the new unit pool, one to get a random unit for the shop, and one to add a unit back to the pool, for example, when we sell a unit with the SellPortal. And inside the PlayerStats resource, we'll also add 2 new dictionaries, one called Roll Rarities, and the other one is called Roll Chances. We'll use this because it's not just the units that are random themselves, you also have different chances to hit units with different rarities based on your current level. Let's take a look at how this unit pool works in practice. So let's say we have those 3 UnitStats resources with their corresponding pool counts. So when we have this data available, we can use the unit pool resource to generate the unit pool based on the pool count. So the unit pool will look like this. We'll have 4 Björns, 3 Robins, and 2 Arthurs inside the unit pool. All of this is based on the new pool count property. What about getting a random unit? So when our unit pool is ready and generated, let's say we want to get a random unit based on rarity. Why? Well, because we have the chances set up. Let's say I have a 30% chance to roll for the lowest rarity when I'm level 1, right? So what we do is we roll a die, and let's say if it's between 1 and 4, we get a common unit, but if it's 5 or 6, we get a better one, right? So the first thing we have to decide is what rarity from the pool we want to look at. Let's say we rolled a 3. Well, that narrows it down because Arthur is out of the picture. So as this one random unit, we cannot get Arthur. But we still have Björn and Robin, right? So getting one specific random unit starts with narrowing down the rarity, and then we just need to grab one from the remaining part of the pool. Let's say in this case we rolled for Robin. And that's how we can arrive at getting one single unit to appear in the shop. So why do we have those 2 dictionaries? Well, the way this works was really inspired by how the system works in TFT. So you can see this table on the right. You have different weights or different roll chances based on your level. So it's not called rarity in this game, but rather the rarity is based on the gold cost of the unit. So you'll see at level 1 you have a 100% chance to roll 1 cost units. Level 2 is the same, but when you hit level 3, you have a 75% chance to roll 1 cost units and a 25% to roll 2 cost. And all of this data is based on the current level. So that's exactly the system we're using here. So when I said we need to roll a die to decide which rarity we need to look at inside the pool, this is what I meant. Without further ado, let's get started implementing this. So I have the project open here, and the first thing we want to do is to change the UnitStats resource. So we have this pool count property available. Let's go to the script tab, press Ctrl-Alt-O, and search for unit_stats.gd. And the change will be pretty simple. we just scroll down to the data category, and under our tier property, we'll just introduce a new one called pool count. This will be an integer, and we can set it to whatever we want by default. I just use 5 here. And that's all we need. Let's save this with Ctrl S and see how we can proceed. When we're done with this, we can continue with creating the UnitPool resource next. So let's go back to 2D view, and in our file system, let's scroll down to data. We can collapse the player and units for now. Right click on the data folder, create a new folder, and let's call it unit_pool. And in that folder, we can right click, create a new script. Let's call it unit_pool.gd. And we can turn off the template so we don't have any auto-generated code. And we can say that it inherits not from the node class, but from the resource class. Click on create, expand the folder, and double click on the script to open it up in the editor. So first of all, let's add a custom class name called UnitPool. Then we'll have an export variable where we add all the available units or UnitStats resources to an array. We'll also have a member variable called UnitPool, which will again be an array of UnitStats. So what's the difference between these two? For the available units, we only have to add all of the units we can have through the shop once. Then for the unit pool, we add those UnitStats resources multiple times based on their pool count property, right? So for now, we have 3 available units in the game: Björn, Robin, and Arthur. We add all of those 3 once to that UnitStats array, but when we actually generate the unit pool, right now the pool count is set to 5, so we add all 3 of those units 5 times to that other array. That makes it really easy to pick units from this big array where all the available units are added multiple times. So why don't we do that with the generate unit pool method? So we only need to call this once when the game starts or when a new game starts. And what we do is we say that the unit pool will be an empty array to begin with. Then we loop through all the available UnitStats resources inside that export variable and create another loop which repeats equal to the amount we have set for the pool count, and we append that unit to the unit pool array that many times. And that's it. It's that easy to generate this unit pool. How about getting a random unit based on rarity? So this method will have one parameter, a rarity from the UnitStats rarity enum, and it will return a UnitStats resource. The first thing we do is we call the arrays filter method and pass an anonymous function to it. We grab the UnitStats resource, which is inside our unit pool array, and say that we only keep it with the filter if that UnitStats resource's rarity matches the one we want to filter for. This way, if we filter for only rare units, then Björn and Robin will be out of the picture and Arthur remains. And when we did that filtering, 2 things can happen. We either end up with an array that has at least 1 unit, then we can provide a random unit from that array, but it can happen that the array becomes empty. If we no longer have rare units inside the pool, then we can say that this array will be empty, and then we can return null from this function. But if it's not empty, we can use array.pickRandom to pick a random UnitStats resource from the remaining filtered array of units, right? And why not return immediately here? We could say return units.pickRandom. Well, because we don't just need to return that UnitStats we picked from the pool, we also need to erase it from the pool, right? Because we only have a finite amount of units available. So we store that picked unit in a variable, then call UnitPool.erase picked unit. And this will return the first occurrence of that resource from the array. Mind you that we need to use the original unit pool array here. We cannot use the filtered array because the next time we want to pick a new unit, we'll use that unit pool member variable to start the filtering from. And when we erased it from the unit pool, then we can finally return from the function with that UnitStats resource. Okay, so this is how we can get a random unit from the pool based on the rarity we have. And we have one final method to implement, and that is adding back a unit to the unit pool. Why do we need this? Well, because when we sell a unit we no longer need to the SellPortal, that unit should go back to the pool, re-add it back to the pool so we can roll for it again. So this method has one parameter, which is a UnitStats resource, and we cannot just simply add it back to the array. Why? Well, because we might sell a 3-star unit, right? And in this case, it's not just one unit that goes back into the pool, it has to be the amount of combined units that are quote-unquote stored inside the unit based on its tier. Fortunately for us, we already have this method inside the UnitStats class called getCombinedUnitCount. If you press and hold Control and click on it, you remember we calculated this formula to get how many tier 1 units are needed to get that combination which is stored inside the UnitStats. So if we go back, you see we stored that inside a variable. We duplicate the original UnitStats resource we had just to make sure we can set back its tier to 1, because we don't want to add back tier 2 or tier 3 units to the unit pool, because when you buy a unit, it's always just a tier 1 copy. And then what we do is just create a for loop which repeats the amount of times stored in the combined count. So if it's a tier 1 unit, this will be 1. If it's a tier 2 unit, this will be 3. And if it's a tier 3 unit, this will be 9 times, right? And all we need to do is grab the unit pool array and append that duplicate resource we created. And that's it. Those are all the things we need from the unit pool. So we have the 3 methods we discussed in the architecture part, and basically this array, which contains the unit pools. We just need this export variable to make sure that we can generate it. So add all the units multiple times. Hope it makes sense. If it does, we can save this with Control S. But just creating this class doesn't mean that we already have a UnitStats resource, so let's create one. Let's go back to 2D view, right-click on the UnitPool folder and create a new resource, and we can search for unitpool.gd. Let's call it unit_pool, save it, double-click on it, and we need to set the available units array. So let's click on that array UnitStats property, set the size to 3, and in our file system, from the units folder, we can just drag and drop all the available units we have. So first, let's use Arthur. And if we don't want to drag and drop them, we can use the arrows as usual and press quick load. So let's add all 3 of those. Okay, so now we have a unit pool that is available and ready to go. Let's save the whole thing with Control S and move on. If you remember from the architecture part, we have one final piece of data we need to set up before actually hooking all this up with the shop. And that is adding these roll rarities and roll chances dictionaries to the PlayerStats resource. So let's go to the script tab, press Ctrl-Alt-O and search for player_stats.gd. And here we have one constant called XP requirements, and we'll add 2 new ones under this one. One is called roll rarities and one is called roll chances. So I know it looks a bit weird. Let's discuss why we need this. So you'll see you need to look at this in pairs. So for example, at level 3, for the roll rarities, you have an array of 2 rarities, the common and the uncommon one. And for the same level, in the roll chances dictionary, you have an array of 2 floating point variables, a 7.5 and a 2.5. So this corresponds to the table we saw for TFT, right? So these are weights, not percentages, because it's much handier. If you remember from the AutoBattler course, using weights eliminates a lot of problems that you have when using percentages, and it's easier to tweak. I know this solution doesn't look like the best one. We could definitely use one nested dictionary, for example, but I wanted to use this structure for a very specific reason. And that is the fact that with Godot 4.3, we have a new method in the random number generator class called randWeighted. And it's super cool because we had to implement random weighted distribution ourselves when we did the Godot AutoBattler course, but now it's actually added to the engine by default. So if you take a look at this example, you have an array where you have strings and you have another array with the weights, right? And so this randWeighted method grabs this array of weights, this one, and returns an index based on the chances. So for example, this one is much more likely to be chosen compared to this one, right? So this returns an index, either 0, 1, 2, or 3, respectively. So then with this index returned, we can use it to grab the correct element from the other array. So we use my array and the brackets, and then this randWeighted method will return a random index, right? So we need 2 arrays for this to work. And that's exactly what we're doing here, right? So all of these pairs are identified by the level number, right? That's why we use a dictionary. So at level 6, we have this array with the weights, and we have this array with the rarities. Pretty cool, right? So with these 2 dictionaries added, let's see how we can actually create a method that uses these values, these weights. So under our export variables, we'll add a new method called getRandomRarity for level. It requires no parameters and it returns a UnitStats.rarity enum value. What we do is we create a new random number generator, then provide the two arrays we need for this rand weighted array to work. I deliberately coded this so it resembles the example from the documentation, right? So the array we pick from comes from the role rarities dictionary according to the current level as a key. So let's say the level is 6. This means that the array will be this one, right? In terms of the weights, we need to use a pegged float 32 array. So we grab the raw chances dictionaries according array with the level as a key, in this case, this one, convert it into a pegged float 32 array and use it as the weights. And then we can just return this arrays, meaning the array with the rarities, random index, which we'll grab from the rand weighted method. Pretty cool, huh? I was super happy to see that this was actually added as a built-in functionality. That's the last piece of the puzzle we need before actually hooking up this system with the shop. So let's save the PlayerStats resource with Ctrl+S and see how we can actually use all that new stuff we added. If you like my content, please consider checking out my Ko-fi page where you can donate one time or become a member and get early access to all my content and videos. Okay, so now comes the fun part, hooking this up inside the shop. So let's press Ctrl+Alt+O and search for shop.gd. And we need to change up a few things here. First of all, we need to dynamically instantiate UnitCard scenes, right? So the first thing we do is we'll create a new constant called UnitCard where we preload that UnitCard scene we created for the available units. Then we also need a new export variable for a UnitPool resource so we can always access the UnitPool in its current state. The next thing we want to do is to actually replace the code we have inside ready. So if we go back to 2D view for a sec, you'll see that we have these unit cards instantiated inside our shop as sort of placeholders to see how the whole thing looks like. When the game actually runs, we want to get rid of all of these and replace them with unit cards that are actually chosen from the pool, right? So these are just added as like a visual feedback or for a testing purpose, and we need to replace those with actual random units picked from the pool. So if we go back to the script tab, what we'll do instead is this. First of all, we'll call the UnitPool's generate UnitPool method, which is need to be done once when the game starts. Then we can iterate through all the nodes that are the children of the shop cards VBucks container, and we can delete them with Q3 because again, these are just placeholders. And then we'll need to implement a new method called roll units, which can happen 2 times. Either when we initialize the shop right here, or you guessed it, when we press the reroll button, right? So in both of these cases, we'll need to roll for new units. And that's exactly what we'll be doing inside this method. So how can we roll for new units? First of all, since the shop has 5 units available at all times, we'll need to iterate through a loop which repeats 5 times. Then what we do is we grab a random rarity for each of those iterations, and we use the PlayerStats.getRandomRarity for level method we just created during the previous step. Then when we know what rarity we rolled for, we can instantiate a new unit card instance, set the UnitStats resource to a random unit which we pick based on the rarity from the unit pool. So we have this method which requires a rarity, which was already decided for us, and returns a UnitStats resource from the pool. Then we need to connect the unit bot signal of the new unit card to our own callback method. And finally, when everything is set up, we call the shop cards VBucks containers add child method and append this new unit card. Repeat this 5 times and you have a full new set of units. But we still have 2 more things to do, and that is handling when the reroll button was pressed. Also, we need another method, and let me explain why after doing it. So this method will be called putBackRemaining to pool, and what it does is it iterates through all the unit cards that are currently instantiated under the shop cards VBucks container. And we need to filter through them and look for units that are not bought by the player. And if the player haven't bought them, then we add that unit back to the unit pool with the UnitPool's add unit method. And when we're finished with that, we can delete the unit card with Q3. So why do we need this? Let's say that I rolled for 5 units, right? and I bought 2 of them. Seeing those 5 units appear inside my shop means that they were removed from the unit pool when this method was called, right? So when we actually roll for units and call this method, let me press and hold Control and click on that. You'll see we call the UnitPool.erase method to remove that picked unit from the unit pool. So when we go back to the shop and roll for 5 units, it means that 5 units will be removed from the pool to be displayed as units that you can buy. But what happens when we click on reroll and only bought 2 units out of 5? Then if we don't put them back to the pool before rolling for 5 new units, those 3 units that we didn't buy would be gone forever. So we need to be aware of this problem, and when we roll for a new set of 5 units, all the ones which weren't bought need to be added back to the pool. Otherwise we would just lose those units and the pool would become empty really quickly. This is why we need this method. Hopefully it makes sense. And the final thing we need to change is what happens when we actually click on the reroll button, because right now we just print a debug message saying that we should reroll units into new ones. So instead what we'll do is, just to demonstrate how this whole thing works, we'll print the unit pool, then call the putback remaining to pool method, again for the same reason. If we only bought 1 or 2 units from the available ones, the 3 remaining need to be added back to the unit pool. Then we print it again to see if it works or not, and then we can call the roll units method to roll for 5 new units from all the available ones inside the pool. And that's basically it. We can save the script with Ctrl S, and before we test it, let's go back to 2D view, select our shop inside the UI, and you'll see that the unit pool export variable will be empty. We can set it either here, or we can click on the Open in Editor button to open up that scene in a new tab, and we can set it right here. I would argue that this is the better place to set it, because if you want to test it separately, not inside the arena, then you need to set the unit pool here as well. So we can just click on the arrow next to empty, press quick load, and add unitpool.tres. Now if we save this with Ctrl S and go back to the arena, it will be updated and set here as well. So we can test the whole thing by running the game or pressing F5. And you'll see that it kind of works, because if you take a look at the available units, we have 2 Robins and 3 Björns. But we already see we have a problem, right? Can you spot the issue? Yeah, the images are the same. But if we click on the units, it says bought unit Robin gold 49. So it looks like the correct UnitStats resource is assigned to these values, but for some reason the image not displays correctly. Okay, so let's say we bought 3 units and our unit pool consists of 15 units to begin with, because we set the unit pool count to 5 by default. What this means is when I press the reroll button, I should see 10 units, and after we put back these 2 remaining units, we should have 12 units instead, because before we roll into 5 new ones, these 2 should be added back to the pool. So let's click on reroll and see what we have here. So when we clicked on the button, the current pool had 5 Arthurs, which checks out because we didn't see Arthur at all, 2 Björns and 3 Robins. But if you take a look at the other array printed after we called that put remaining back method, you'll see that the Robin and the Björn was added back. So a more extreme example would be not buying anything from the shop. You'll see we have 4 Robins and 1 Björn. So if I press reroll, you'll see that the remaining units were 5 Arthurs and 2 Björns. But after calling that put remaining back, these 4 Robins and 1 Björn were all added back to the unit pool. And this is why we need that method. Hopefully it makes sense. And you'll see that we didn't really see Arthur at all, right? Because if we double click on Arthur, he's a rare unit, so we shouldn't see that if our level isn't high enough. So if we buy some XP, and we go to level 6 and reroll, then we'll see 2 Arthurs and 3 empty slots. This is not a problem by any means. I know it looks weird, but let's think about this for a second. Why do we see these empty slots here? You see, Arthur is a rare unit. So we have common, uncommon, rare, and legendary tiers or rarities. If we open up our PlayerStats script where we have the chances, you'll see that at level 6, we have a chance to roll for common, uncommon, and rare units. And the weights or chances are 4, 4, and 2. And in this case, what happened is we rolled for 3 uncommon units, but we don't actually have one in the pool because both Robin and Björn are common and Arthur is rare. So because the pool doesn't really have uncommon units available, the method returns null, and that's why we have empty placeholders here. And this doesn't really bother me because we at least know that the game doesn't break or crash when we cannot roll for units with a given rarity. So if we buy some XP again and roll for units, you'll see another problem. So everything related to the shop or this unit pool mechanics works perfectly fine. Putting back units to the pool works, removing them, rolling based on the level, everything works fine, but we do have some issues with the unit cards. One issue is that the images won't update. So Arthur, Björn, and Robin all have the same image. And also you see the border color is set correctly, but the bottom part, this background behind the name of the unit and the gold cost doesn't update. So these are issues with the unit card from the previous episode and not issues with the shop we set up. Let's fix those real quick. So if we go back to 2D view, press Ctrl-Shift-O and search for UnitCard.tscn. Do you remember how we fixed the border? Because we had the same issue with the border last time. So we went to the stylebox flat resource, scrolled all the way down and set this local to scene property, toggled it on, and this meant that this resource will be duplicated for each of the instances. Well, it fixed the issue with the borders, but we have the same issue with the unit images and the bottom panel we have. So it has the same fix as well. Let's select the bottom node, this panel from the scene tree, select the stylebox flat we created, go to resource and toggle local to scene on. Select the unit icon, go to resource, and toggle local to scene on as well. And if we save this unit card scene with Ctrl S, those two changes for the unit icon and the bottom panel should fix these issues. So if we run the project again by clicking on this icon or pressing F5, you'll immediately see that Robin will have the correct image set. And if we buy some XP, and roll for Arthur's, you'll see that the color will be updated as well. So it looks a lot nicer now. I can roll for units from the pool. I can click on these. And we have these bought unit messages saying that a new unit should be added when we click on it. So the next thing we'll do is to actually spawn the unit in when we click on it instead of this display message. But before we do that, let's go back to the script tab, press Ctrl-Alt-O, and inside shop.gd, once we are 100% sure that this put back remaining to pool method works, we can get rid of these print statements. These were just used to demonstrate how we really need to put units back to the pool before rolling for a new one. Save this with Ctrl-S, and we'll see how we can hook everything up with the UnitSpawner next. And since we did that bubbling up thing in the last episode in this callback method, when the onUnitBought signal is emitted by a unit card, the shop itself emits its own UnitBought signal with the same parameters. So if we scroll all the way up, you'll see that we have a signal for this. And this makes it really, really easy to actually hook this up. So let's go back to 2D view. We can close the unit card scene and the shop scenes for now. And inside the arena, to make sure that it's easy to access the shop instance from the arena script, we can right click on the shop and access it as a scene unique name. Click on the script icon next to the arena. And what we can do, since we have this scene unique name attached to the shop, we can drag it and drop it inside the script as an unready variable by pressing and holding Control. And so adding the shop to the script is easy as that. Then we just need one line of code. We connect the shop's unit bought signal to the UnitSpawner's spawn unit method, and that's it. It's this easy and clean. If we press and hold Control and click on this spawn unit method, you'll see that this method requires a UnitStats resource as a parameter. And lucky for us, this unit bought signal, if we press and hold Control and click on it, has that UnitStats resource as a parameter too. So we can just connect those two together and we can save the whole thing with Control S. And if we run the game and click on the units, now we actually buy the units when we click on them. So we can sell all these ones, and let's hope we find an Arthur. And if we click on Arthur, an Arthur unit gets spawned. And we can do everything we can do with units after buying them, we can swap them around, we can sell them to the SellPortal. So the whole thing feels really nice and interactive immediately. Cool. So hooking it up was this easy. One thing we can also do is we can get rid of that bot unit and God print messages because we no longer need them, right? So with the script tab open, we can press Ctrl-Alt-O and search for UnitCard.gd. And if we go to the ready callback, this is where we connected that anonymous function so we can test if it works or not. We can just get rid of this now because we know that it works for sure, and save this with Ctrl-S. And one final thing we need to do is we need to change the SellPortal a bit. Why? Well, because when we sell a unit, we need to add it back to the pool like we discussed. So let's press Ctrl-Alt-O and search for SellPortal.gd. And the first thing we want to do is we want to add a new export variable for the UnitPool resource so we can have access to this add unit method. Then we can click on that sell unit method we have, and you'll see that we even have a comment here which says to do put units back to the pool. And we also have a debug statement printing the amount of gold the player has. We no longer need this either. So instead of these two, what we can do is we can say UnitPool.addUnit and just grab the UnitStats resource of that unit. And just to test if it works or not, we can print the unit pool after adding it back based on the UnitStats resource. That's all we really need here. So let's save this with Ctrl-S. Go back to 2D view, and don't forget to set up this export variable. So press Ctrl-Shift-O, search for SellPortal.tscn. Click on the root node, and you'll see we have two empty resources here. We can just quick load the unit pool and quick load the player stats here as well. So if you wanted to test it separately, it works perfectly fine. Save this with Ctrl-S. And if we go back to the arena now, our SellPortal should have both of those resources set, and we are ready to test this. But in order to test this properly, we want to test with higher tier units as well, not just with tier 1 units. And since we don't have a way to combine units for now, we need to test it with something else. So what we can do is in the file system doc, we can right click on Björn and click on duplicate, and let's call this björn_test.tres. Double click on it and set the tier to 2 instead of 1. And we have a couple units lying around here, and these will be perfect to test the whole thing. So let's go to bench and select one of these units and change the unit stats from Björn to Björn test. Okay, so now if we run the game and sell this unit, it should have 3 Björns added to the back of the unit pool. And we do have it because you see, we added the units in alphabetical order. So we have 5 Arthurs, we have 2 Björns and 3 Robins because the other ones are inside the shop. And those 3 Björns were added back to the unit pool when we sold the unit. Okay, just to make sure, let's double click on our Björn test again, set it to tier 3. And this should mean that 9 Björns will add it back to the unit pool when we sell this, and it is worth 9 gold as well. And you'll see we have a bunch of Björns at the end of our unit pools now. So this was just to make sure that the unit pool works correctly. Awesome, so everything works as it's supposed to. We can go back to the script tab and we can get rid of that print statement since we saw that it works fine. Save it with Ctrl-S, and I think we're done with everything. So we hooked up the shop. We have spawning units when you click on unit cards, and the pool is managed correctly, and you get recommendations based on your level and the random chances. So that's it for this video, and I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.